Well, I mean, the use of ATACMS by Ukraine is probably one of the most dangerous events of this entire conflict. It's the one that has the risk of bringing us closer to nuclear war with Russia than just about anything else that's been manifested in this conflict. And the reason is that the ATACMS missiles fired from Ukrainian soil have the potential to hit targets of strategic interest for Russia, targets of strategic sensitivity. And if enough of these targets are struck at the same time in concert with other conventional weapons releases from Ukrainian soil, for instance, of Scout missiles and the French or the British Storm Shadow, I think the Scalp is the French system. This could be part of what Russia would fear to be a preemptive attack, seeking to decapitate Russian leadership or otherwise suppress Russian strategic capabilities. And this is something that Russia has always had a doctrine saying they would respond to, but now they've specifically addressed this very issue in their most recent doctrine. And in short, the use of these missiles from Ukrainian soil, even by Ukrainian forces, because these missiles were provided by the United States, targeted by the United States, etc., this exceeds the threshold necessary for Russian nuclear weapons release. And I just want to make that point one more time. The use of ATACMS missiles by Ukrainians against Russian soil exceeds the threshold set by Russia in its nuclear doctrine for release of nuclear weapons. So if we wanted to go to war, nuclear war, if Russia, doctrinally, the smoking lamp has been lit. Fortunately, Russia doesn't want to go to nuclear war, and Russia has sent a signal to the United States. There was a phone call sometime in November between General Gerasimov and General Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Russian Chief of Staff. The contents of the content haven't been publicly released in terms of a transcript, but the one of the topics that has been claimed to have been addressed in this is that Gerasimov said, look, if as long as the ATACMS are used to a certain range threshold, we'll just blow the crap out of Ukraine. That'll be our response. If it exceeds that threshold, then we're coming after you. And so far, Ukraine has been firing ATACMS missiles below that threshold. So if the reported conversation is true, all parties have received notice. The problem is Ukraine is desperate. You mentioned in your opening statement about an offensive in Kursk. It's literal suicide. I'm sure Andre and Larry will be able to add things to that. It didn't work. It's not going to work. They're all dying. Zelensky is furious at Syrskyi because he was supposed to create something that allowed Zelensky to, in effect, blackmail Trump and say, you have to continue funding me. Look what happens when you give me money and the great successes the Ukrainian army has. We need to go on. But instead, all the Ukrainian soldiers dead. It didn't work. The Ukrainians are desperate. And my concern is that the Ukrainians will release ATACMS at ranges greater than the threshold set by Russia. And in that case, I believe Russia will use the Oreshnik missile, multiple numbers of the Oreshnik missile, against targets of strategic value. They won't be nuclear attacks, but Russia will pound the living snot out of Ukraine using Oreshniks. And it'll be a statement not just for Ukraine, but for Trump as well. And the statement is, we really don't care about you anymore. You're irrelevant to us. You mean nothing to us. We're going to finish this war the way we want to finish it. And you get in our way, that's going to happen to you. We're not playing games here. And it's also a message being sent to the British who are behind the Kursk offensive. This is a British operation, British planned, conceived. It's part of the British mindset of how to keep Ukraine in the fight. And it's a message to the British, and it's a message to the French, who still operate under some misconception that, and the Germans, that they can send troops to Ukraine and that the conditions will be created there. They can send these troops to Ukraine. I think Russia, if pushed, will send a strategic signal in the form of multiple Oreshnik missiles that will have horrific impact on the targets, because the targets that will be selected, I believe, won't be a throwaway demonstration target. I think it will be a target of strategic value and of visual value, meaning it can't be hidden behind a wall. For instance, if Bankova Street ceased to exist, that would be one such target. And I think the Russians are in the mood right now where they may be ready, willing, and able to pull that trigger. That's one step short of the next to last step before a nuclear war, because if that doesn't work, the next thing is to strike NATO targets. And I believe that three most likely targets are the two anti-ballistic missile systems, and one in Poland, one in Romania, and Ramstein Air Base comes up there as well as the heart of the logistics transfer. And then the next step after that is nuclear war, and it's so we're 3 steps away from a nuclear war, and Ukraine appears ready, willing, and able to facilitate that. That's what has me worried.
You know, Scott, there have been some who have come to me and said, or have sent me messages, communicated with me saying, each time that Ukraine launches ATACMS, I know they don't have that many left, but they've been launching them consistently since they received approval from the United States, or a green light, or whatever we want to call it. They say that the response has been too soft, that there hasn't been a hard enough response to this. What do you have to say to people who say this? Most people who have come to me with this reside in the collective West. They're observing it from the outside, and they believe Russia should take an even harder response to these transgressions.
Well, I think Larry touched upon this. Russia's winning. Well, how hard do you want Russia to get? I mean, go to the front line in the line of contact anywhere, in Kursk or anywhere, and count the dead bodies. They're almost all Ukrainian. Look at the advances being made. It's all by Russia. Russia has a strategic objective in this conflict that's been consistent from day one, and they're achieving it. The one thing that can disrupt this is if you do something that changes the military correlation of forces. And the only way to rapidly change the military correlation of forces to the detriment of Russia is to introduce NATO forces or European forces in significant numbers. And that's a political decision that can't be made under the current circumstances, because the costs would be unacceptable to the West. But if Russia overreacts, if Russia does something that creates a new political, operating environment where suddenly people in Europe take a look at the risk gain analysis and say, "Hey, Russia's gone insane. We have no choice now. We have no choice but to commit to a Ukrainian fight." It doesn't matter that Russia will probably win that fight. That's a fight Russia doesn't want. Russia is not looking for a war with NATO. Russia is not looking to expand this conflict. Russia is looking to win the special military operation and achieve the objectives that have been laid out very clearly by the Russian leadership. So I would tell the people that are looking to, strike harder, go get your passport, travel to Russia. I'm sure you can find one, some unit to sign up with. They'll give you uniforms, and you get to play soldier for a day, go down there and die. If you want to hit harder, go hit. Otherwise, shut up. Because if you don't have sweat equity or blood equity, if you're an analyst, stop talking about other people dying. If you're going to say Russia has to strike harder, explain why. Why do you believe Russia has to strike harder, other than, serving their need to, be a part of the conflict, remote control? No. If you're an analyst, then you have to step back and you have to assess. Now, if they wanted to come in and say, we believe that the ATACMS missiles are having a significant strategic impact on Russian command and control, logistics, all this, and that left unresponded to, or left responded to with the soft approach, the correlation of forces are going to shift in a matter of 2-3 weeks, and the Ukrainians are going to achieve battlefield dominance that will be strategically decisive against Russia. If they want to make that claim, then you can say, yeah, maybe Russia has to hit harder. But as Larry said, Russia's ahead 70-0. And if Ukraine wants to make the score 14-70, the game's still lost. But I'm just telling you right now, A, they're not going to score 2 touchdowns. And B, in playing the Russians hard like that, they're going to get so many injuries that the final score is going to be 120-0. That's the reality. There's nothing that can happen right now to change the outcome other than changing the political environment that allows NATO to think they have to intervene. Russia is not going to do a favor to Ukraine. That's my perspective. Russia's hitting as hard as Russia needs to hit, and it's pretty damn hard. It's pretty damn hard. People, I don't know what they think's going on the front lines now. They think it's a game. They think Russia's around there just doing a waltz and all this. Russian soldiers are fighting and dying every day in some of the harshest modern warfare conditions you have ever seen. They're fighting against an enemy who is tenacious, an enemy that if you make a mistake because they have training, they have weaponry, they will kill you. And there's a lot of dead Russians that prove that point. The Ukrainian army's pretty damn good. They're probably better than any of the NATO advisors whispering sweet nothings in their ears. And those boys are out there fighting and dying on a battlefield against Russians who are fighting their butts off, and you want them to hit harder? The people who say that have no clue whatsoever what they're talking about. And I apologize for getting angry, but I just get tough. I get very upset with armchair warriors who think that they're, that they can type on their keyboard, hit harder, and that somehow means that they're real men. If you're a real man, get off your ass, go to the battlefield, strap up, go to the front line. And if you make it, you come home, I'll buy you a beer and say, wow, you're hard.
Scott, there was it's 2025 now, but the last day of 2024, there was an op-ed in The Hill by a gentleman, James Durso. And in this op-ed, I'll just read a very short portion of it. He said that he spoke to an anonymous American diplomat who in 2024 of April, there was a band of Ukrainian officials, including Budanov, who came to Washington, participated in some think tank events, and had private meetings with U.S. officials. And the roundtable discussions that happened, this diplomat said that they expressed their reservations about continuing full-scale conventional warfare. They are concerned that Ukraine had lost momentum and would be overwhelmed. They advocate instead for asymmetric warfare inside of Russia to gain an upper hand in negotiations to end the war. So, Scott, a lot has happened since April of 2024, from the ATACMS to the Kursk offensive to all of these terrorist attacks. What does this say about the changing character of the conflict and how things have shaped up? Because this seems to be a pretty big bombshell that there were people inside of Washington who knew what was going to come in the preceding months. And it seems like a lot of folks, maybe Europe, a lot of NATO aficionados, they didn't really know what was coming, and Ukraine as well. What's your take?
First of all, let's start with the premise that the United States never believed Ukraine could win this war. And the United States never prepared Ukraine for a war-winning strategy. What the United States did in the lead up to the special military operation beginning in the years leading up was to train the Ukrainians to mount a vigorous defense, knowing that it would collapse. And then the CIA, through its Special Activities Division, together with Joint Special Operations personnel, had trained a significant stay-behind element amongst Ukrainian special forces, special operations forces, territorial forces, etc. This is part of an old American approach. I may have mentioned it before, but Detachment A of the Berlin Brigade was a special forces detachment that specialized in unconventional warfare, and their wartime mission was to get overrun by the Soviets and then to begin waging guerrilla warfare against the Soviets. This is what This is a special forces mission, unconventional warfare, guerrilla warfare. It's a CIA paramilitary mission, and we trained a significant number of Ukrainian special forces. Budanov received this training as well. This was always the plan. The plan was always to lure the Russians in, get them bogged down, and then to make them bleed to death over a period of time, and present a situation where, while Russia wasn't losing the war, Russia wasn't winning the war, and therefore morale would be sapped within Russia. This is part of the overall strategy that the CIA has had for some time now of bringing down the Russian government, collapsing the Russian government. You do this in a combination of ways. You use economic warfare. That's what the sanctions were supposed to do. The CIA has a long history of working on democracy in Russia, and it's just the exact opposite of creating so-called democratic opposition forces that are working on behalf of the United States and other intelligence services to undermine democracy in Russia. And then in the case of Ukraine, to actually prepare the stay-behind forces, the Jedburghs. And this was always a strategy. This is why when General Miley briefed Congress at the start of the special military operation that the Ukrainian army would probably fall, Kiev would fall within a week. The director of the CIA made a similar assessment. Nobody expected Ukraine to stand up. And to be honest, while the Ukrainian resistance was a little bit more resilient than maybe thought, that also might be linked to the fact that the Russians had zero combat experience at the start of the war, and they made a lot of mistakes. But the Russians weren't beat. If you think the Russians got beat in phase one of this war, you don't know anything about war. Russia took casualties, but they prevailed. They inflicted a lot of harm on the Ukrainians, but the Russians made a decision. The special military operation kicked off not for the purpose of occupying Ukraine, but compelling Ukraine to the negotiating table. And Russia achieved that objective. That's what the Istanbul communique was all about at the end of March. And the Russians were successful. But then the collective West made a decision by rejecting the Istanbul communique to engage in conventional warfare. And from that moment on, the CIA took on a task of selling this conventional warfare to the public. And they work with the Ukrainians. This is where you get the Center for Countering Disinformation. You get a whole bunch of other propaganda outlets in Ukraine working together with mainstream outlets. I can tell you that the British have a hand-in-glove relationship with the British press, German intelligence with the German press, American intelligence with the American press. And all we did is start spreading propaganda about how Ukraine's going to win this war. I will tell you right now, with absolute certainty, that the President of the United States was never briefed that Ukraine is going to win this war. We always knew Ukraine could not win this war, that Ukraine would not win this war, but the goal was to make the price of Russian victory so high that Russia would collapse. That was the goal. It's always been to generate a Moscow Maidan, to get the citizens of Moscow to rise up, surround the Kremlin, and demand that Putin go because the Russian boys are dying in Ukraine. It's an endless war. We can't win it. And the Ukrainians are blowing things up in Russia, and they are. The Ukrainian intelligence has penetrated Russia to an extent that the West isn't even aware of. The FSB is aware because they're rolling up these cells every day. And on occasion, these guys have successes. They blow up trains, they blow up recruiting offices, they assassinate people. There is an unconventional war taking place. It's CIA directed, CIA backed, CIA promoted, but it's not having the impact because the decision was never made to shift over to full attention on unconventional warfare. Instead, a decision was made to continue to promote conventional warfare as the optimal way of dragging the Russians down. It failed. But at no time, and I think history will prove this when they declassify the archives, at no time did anybody of note ever turn to the president and say, "We got this one, boss. Ukraine's going to win this war." Because only a moron would say that. Truly, only a moron would say that. There's no way you could possibly come up with the mobilization of defense industrial capabilities needed to match that which Russia has done. I mean, they're playing political games, but there's not seriousness behind it. There's not serious military force behind any of these statements about Ukraine winning, other than dead Ukrainians. That's the reality. So no, nobody ever told the president of the United States. And this diplomat, I don't know who he is and all that, but don't be shocked by the fact that somebody says Ukraine was never going to win this war. We knew from day one Ukraine was never going to win this war. All we wanted to do was inflict harm on Russia. We wanted to make this war so costly that it created a domestic political unrest inside Russia that led to the toppling of the Putin government.